Hello YouTube, back with a Yashika Minister D, and when I got this, it had, among other things, there's a bunch of things wrong with it, but it had a stuck shutter. I looked online, I found some vague-ish information, and to keep a long story short, in order to get, well, let me tell you what I found first. The shutter didn't work. You could click it, you could wind it up, click it, and you could hear something working in there, but the shutter itself would not open. So I fiddled around with it for a little while, and finally I took my loop, and I don't have it, or do I? This is not the one I used, but it's similar. I took my loop and I got right down in there and I looked, and every time I wound up and released the shutter, I could see the leaf blades in the shutter twitch just a little bit. So that made me wonder if maybe there was something hanging them up. So I couldn't get the outer ring off. You'll see it's loose right now. But I tried grabbing it, I tried cranking it off, didn't work. So I got one of these things. I don't know what they're called. My wife has a bunch of them for taking jars off, lids off of pickle jars, whatever. This allowed me to get a good grip without necessarily having to apply a great deal of force. And once I had a good grip on it, I was able to crank the first two lenses right out, just like that. Came out as a unit, the whole thing. And then right there you'll see is, I hope you can see, are the shutter leaves. And then from the inside, and these are a cool, kind of a cool, quirky camera. To open the back, you have to push this little tab from the P to the O, and then depress it. And the back pops, so it took me a while to figure that out. And from the back side, you should be able to see again the iris. Now, again, long story short, what I found was the blades of both the iris and the shutter weren't just stuck with oil; they were saturated with oil, a very peculiar amount. So once I got the front lens out and the back lens, I used my spanner tool. This is not adjusted properly since I've used it since then, but I adjusted it to grab those two slots on the lens. It was right in there in the back side. This is what you're going to see when you look in the back. So I grabbed a hold of that with the spanner wrench and took that out. And I will caution you on one thing. When you adjust this thing to fit into those two slots on this lens, you want to make sure that you're inboard just a little bit. We're looking at this blade here. You want to be inboard just a little bit. You don't want things sticking out, because if you have that thing sticking out on both sides, what this point is going to do is it's going to, as you turn it, it's going to dig up the threading on the inside of the lens where this thing has to screw back into. So you want to be very, very careful about that. So I have the entire set of lenses out of the camera. There's nothing left here except the shutter and the aperture blades. And what I did, I prefer generally to use alcohol to clean these things up. I use 99% alcohol. This time, however, there was so much oil, the alcohol just wouldn't touch it, so I used naphtha. A lot of people recommend lighter fluid, which I guess works pretty well, but I don't have any. But I did happen to have some naphtha. So as I've described in other videos, and I don't have any Q-tips right here at my bench right at the moment. I took Q-tips, dipped it in naphtha, saturated, just laid it right in there. I actually did it this way so it wouldn't drip into the body of the camera. or this way, so it would go down and forward. Just laid the naphtha in there, got it good and wet, and then worked everything. I worked the shutter, I worked the aperture, and it took a time or two, but the shutter did loosen up and it started to work. And the more I worked it, the better it got, and I kept getting it soggy wet with naphtha, and then I would blow dry it with compressed air. And I did that repeatedly for, I don't know, half an hour or so until it worked well. And this is a couple of days ago, and I've still been able to make it work just fine. So now it's doing what it's supposed to do at all speeds. The bulb works. Everything from, this is calibrated from a 500th of a second all the way down to 1 second, and beyond that is bulb, and they all work. So it took a little while. Now, doing it this way, the real way to get to the shutter is to, and I didn't want to do this because it just broke my heart, is you have to peel back the leathers on both sides. There's 4 screws that hold the shutter board in place. Undo that, take the whole lens out, and you can access the shutter bits and pieces from the back side. I didn't want to do that, so I didn't actually remove the oil. What I did was displace it. It was all over the blades, and so by dunking all that naphtha in there, I actually got, and then blowing it away, I'm sure some of it evaporated, but the bulk of it probably just went somewhere else in the camera. I don't, in the lens. I don't know where it went. I don't care, because everything works. And I am going to be satisfied with that. Shutter works great. Focus works great. Aperture and shutter speed work fine. And I just wanted to pass that along. You can also see that there's obviously parts missing. I've had the top of this camera off just today. I'm working on one of the mirrors fell out in the in the focusing mechanism. I had to take that out. I pulled the mirror out, so I'm going to re-glue that. And I've got a problem with the light meter. There's something in the electrical connection that isn't working, so I got to take care of that. One thing, if you're going to do this, one thing I would recommend is that I screwed up when I took this apart. It screwed up my setting. I don't know how these things are adjusted at the factory, and I have a picture of how it was when I took the screw cap off, but that's the only guide I have to work from at this point. So make sure, and before you take this thing apart, make a note of what your ASA is and where your various settings are, because you're going to need to know that to put this thing back together so that it's calibrated at least pretty close to what it was before. So I think that is everything I wanted to show you. Just a quick thing on cleaning up the lens. Okay, so my digital technology failed me yet again, and I lost the last minute or two of this video. I have no idea what I was talking about, but I'm pretty sure my point was, if you're going to be working on a camera with any tool similar to this, bear in mind that, as always, it's a great way to destroy your camera. So with that, I will close up, and until next time, bye. Oh, you gotta be shitting me. You motherfucker. Oh, I gotta do this again.